We pick up our study on the Gospel of Matthew, a gospel written by the Apostle Matthew. We find ourselves at Matthew chapter 9 and verse 9. I'm going to be reading from Norley's translation. As Jesus went further along, he noticed a man sitting at his tax office, Matthew by name, and he said to him, "Follow me." And he got up and followed him. In one verse, we are given the call of Matthew to come and follow Jesus. It is probably the case that Matthew's decision to follow Jesus was a little more complicated than one verse would indicate. Since Matthew was at a booth, we could probably say that the work that Matthew was akin to the person who works at one of those highway toll booths. Now, in my part of the world, we have on the American side of the border something called Easy Pass. In a previous day and age, tolls used to be, you drive your car up to the booth and flick in a few coins, and on you went. We could say that Matthew's job was akin to this. In the Markan version of this, that is in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 2 and verse 13, we have a reference that puts Jesus near a lake. So if we put things together, it seems that the booth that Matthew was sitting at was near to a lake. And that's probably important to understanding what Matthew's job was here. It was probably the Sea of Galilee, which is an actual lake. And it was probably the toll booth that was set up there was to tax trade on the lake. Remember in the first century that one of the best ways to transport goods was across water. Animal transportation was not the most efficient way to do it. And if it is the case that this booth of Matthew was by a lake, it indicates that he was probably a servant of Herod Antipas. Herod Antipas was a Roman puppet ruler of Galilee. The unpopularity of the Herods would make anyone associated with his regime unpopular. Can we say for certain how Matthew came to be a disciple of Jesus? Can we find out the backstory to the event? The answer to these questions is no. In a way, I would say to you that is irrelevant. For when you scratch below the surface, you realize that the steps, and especially when we talk about people in their teen years and their young adult years and beyond, the factors that are required to come to faith that we must deal with are more or less the same. We can begin with the fact that for all people of all time who follow Jesus, there is a loss of security. Was sitting at a booth collecting coins from disgruntled and disagreeable merchants the greatest job in the world? Do people as a rule cheerfully give up their money? Matthew might not have the greatest job in the world, but it did provide him with a sense of security. He knew that his job will be there tomorrow and a year from now. Security was exchanged for the uncertainty of following Jesus. That is true for all of us. We have to let go of those things that provide certainty in our life, to those things that provide security in our life, to embrace the call to follow Jesus and the sense of uncertainty it brings. If you've ever had a time of unemployment, you will understand the next point. There are people who over the years have had to go from job to job. In between, there will be periods of uncertainty. Long-term employment with one employer provides stability. Look at Matthew and what he had with his job. He had stability. He was at a booth on a busy commercial route. The government used what he collected in taxes to help fill the treasury. We know that governments, as a rule, do not cut back on means to collect tax revenue. Matthew had a job that for the foreseeable future would be there. Did following Jesus bring with it stability? It did not bring the stability that we seek in this world. Matthew left stability of his job behind to follow an itinerant preacher. We must embrace the call to follow Jesus, even as it costs us the stability, those things in our life that we count on day by day. And the next reading will read of the dinner party that Matthew held for Jesus. To anticipate that next reading, let's say this, that Matthew invited friends and colleagues to this dinner party. Now the question is, why did these people come? Well, we could say they came because it was an opportunity to see the preacher, that is Jesus, and what people were talking about Jesus. Well, that's true. I think also part of it was the fact that Matthew had status. I'm not saying status outside of the group of tax collectors he was a part of, but I'm saying within the realm of tax collectors, he had status. I'm not saying he was a mover and shaker in the local community. I am saying that in his field he had status. People came to that dinner party because of who he was. Yes, Matthew and his compatriots might not be seen as being socially respectful people in the wider society. If we are to follow Jesus, it will entail a loss of status, whether we find our status in a gang, a garage, or the Grand Ole Opry.